Alright guys, today we got a unique Warhammer 40k story. It's gonna be narrated by Frederick Sure. I hope you guys enjoy it. Get cozy.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there exists a phenomenon that speaks to the fundamental nature of two of the galaxy's most brutal forces. When the fungal hordes of the greenskin menace encounter the twisted, screaming abominations known as Helbrutes, something remarkable occurs. Not remarkable in its beauty, mind you, but remarkable in what it reveals about the paradoxical horror and dark comedy that defines existence in the 41st millennium. This is a story about what happens when unstoppable enthusiasm meets immovable agony, when the creatures who live for war encounter beings who can no longer die from it. To understand this collision of philosophies made flesh and metal, we must first understand what a Helbrute truly is. These are not simply machines of war, not merely weapons platforms deployed by the forces of chaos. They are prisons. They are monuments to suffering. They are cautionary tales given form and function on the battlefield. Each Helbrute was once a space marine, a warrior who had already transcended humanity to become something greater, only to fall from grace and become something infinitely worse. The process that creates a Helbrute begins with injury. A Chaos Space Marine, already damned by his allegiance to the ruinous powers, suffers wounds so catastrophic that his enhanced physiology cannot save him. Where a loyal chapter might enter such a warrior in a dreadnought sarcophagus with ceremony and honor, the warbands of the traitor legions approach the matter differently. There is no dignity in the creation of a Helbrute. There is only necessity tempered by cruelty, practicality, married to malice. The dying warrior is sealed within the armored chassis, his broken body fused with the machine through a combination of archaic technology and warp-spawned mutation. But unlike the honorable interment of a loyalist dreadnought, where the warrior sleeps between battles and awakens with purpose, a Helbrute knows no rest. The pilot remains conscious, trapped within a shell of ceramite and adamantium, feeling every moment of his imprisonment. The pain of his original injuries never fades. The sarcophagus does not heal. It merely prevents death, suspending the pilot in an eternal moment of agony. What makes this torture truly exquisite, from the perspective of the dark gods, is that the pilot's mind begins to fracture under the strain. The chaos energies that permeate the Helbrute systems corrupt and twist whatever remains of the warrior's sanity. Some pilots descend into gibbering madness, their thoughts becoming nothing more than an endless scream of rage and pain. Others develop multiple personalities, fragmentary identities born from the shattered remnants of who they once were. A few maintain enough coherence to remember what they have lost, and these are perhaps the most pitiable of all, for they retain just enough awareness to understand the full scope of their damnation. The physical form of a Helbrute reflects this internal torment. Where loyalist dreadnoughts maintain a certain nobility in their design, a sense of honorable purpose in every rivet and armor plate, Helbrutes are monuments to corruption. Their armor warps and twists over time, developing growths and protrusions that have nothing to do with their original construction. Faces appear in the metal, screaming in silent agony or laughing with malevolent glee. The sacred oils and unguents that might maintain a loyalist war machine are replaced with ichor and pus, the mechanical fluids taking on properties that defy natural law. The weapons mounted on a Helbrute's chassis are equally corrupted. A multi-melter that once simply generated heat through fusion reactions now burns with fires that originate in the warp itself. Flames that can consume not just matter, but souls. A power fist that might have been forged in the workshops of Mars now bears the blessing of violent gods, each blow not simply crushing but desecrating whatever it strikes. Even the targeting systems are affected, seeing the world through a lens colored by madness and malice, identifying targets not through logical threat assessment, but through the twisted priorities of a mind consumed by chaos. The Helbrute's existence is one of contradiction. It possesses immense strength, enough to tear apart battle tanks with its bare hands, yet it is utterly powerless to escape the prison of its own body. It can reduce entire squads of enemy soldiers to scattered atoms with its weapons, but it cannot end its own suffering. It inspires terror in those who face it on the battlefield, yet the greatest terror is reserved for the consciousness trapped within, forever aware, forever suffering, forever damned. Now, we must turn our attention to the other half of this equation. The Orks are a phenomenon unto themselves in the galaxy of the 41st millennium. They are not simply another alien species competing for resources and survival. They are, in many ways, the most honest expression of what Warhammer 40,000 truly represents, where humanity fights for survival and the Eldar struggle against extinction, where the Tau speak of the greater good and the Tyranids hunger without thought. The Orks exist for one pure, uncomplicated purpose. They live to fight. This is not a metaphor or an exaggeration. The Orks are biologically engineered for warfare, created in some ancient age by the mysterious Old Ones, as weapons in a war so vast and terrible that it shaped the fundamental nature of reality itself. Every aspect of their physiology, their society, and their psychology has been optimized for combat. Their muscular structure allows them to grow larger and stronger the more they fight, creating a natural hierarchy where the biggest and strongest Ork has earned that position through violence. Their skeletal system is incredibly resilient, able to withstand impacts that would pulverize human bone. Their pain tolerance is extraordinary, with Orks often failing to notice injuries that would incapacitate other species. But the most remarkable aspect of Ork biology is something that transcends the merely physical. Orks are fungal organisms, and they carry within their bodies an entire ecosystem of symbiotic life forms. When an Ork dies, its body releases spores that will eventually grow into new Orks, along with related species like the diminutive Gretchen and the larger Snotlings. This means that an Ork infestation is almost impossible to completely eliminate. Even if every adult Ork is killed, even if their bodies are burned to ash, the spores they released during their lifetime will eventually produce a new generation. The Ork mind is as remarkable as their body, though in ways that outsiders often struggle to comprehend. They possess a collective psychic field, a gestalt consciousness that binds all Orks together in subtle ways. This field is what allows their technology to function. Ork weapons and vehicles are ramshackle affairs by any conventional standard, cobbled together from scrap metal and spare parts, with no apparent regard for engineering principles. A human tech priest examining an Ork weapon would find components connected in ways that should not work, tolerances that should cause catastrophic failure, and design elements that violate fundamental laws of physics. Yet these weapons fire. These vehicles rumble into battle. These devices perform their intended function because the Orks believe they will. The Gestalt psychic field makes reality malleable in subtle ways, bending the laws of nature just enough to allow Ork technology to operate. A gun painted red fires faster because Orks believe red makes things faster. A vehicle held together with nothing but hope and rivets continues functioning because the Ork driving it has absolute confidence in its reliability. This is not magic in the traditional sense, not in the way that a psyker might channel the warp to produce supernatural effects. It is something more fundamental, reality itself warping to accommodate the collective unconscious expectations of an entire species. The Ork concept of warfare is equally alien to human understanding. They do not fight for territory, though they may occupy conquered worlds. They do not fight for resources, though they will loot battlefields with enthusiasm. They do not fight for ideology or survival, or any of the rational motivations that drive other species to conflict. Orks fight because fighting is what they were made to do, and they love every moment of it. The closest human equivalent might be a professional athlete who has found their calling, someone who experiences genuine joy in the exercise of their skills. But even this comparison falls short, because humans can find fulfillment in activities other than their profession. An Ork removed from battle, prevented from fighting, withers both physically and psychologically. This love of combat manifests in every aspect of Ork society. Their leaders are those who have proven themselves in battle. Their economy revolves around the production of weapons and the spoils of war. Their recreation consists of fighting each other when no other enemies are available. Even their language is peppered with terms related to violence and combat, to the point where it becomes difficult to translate certain Ork concepts into human terms, because those concepts exist only within the context of warfare. The Ork approach to technology deserves special attention, because it is central to understanding what happens when they encounter a Helbrute. Orks have a caste of specialized individuals called mech boys, who possess an intuitive understanding of machinery that borders on the supernatural. A mech boy can look at a wrecked vehicle and immediately understand not only how it was meant to function, but how its components might be repurposed for entirely different applications. They can take disparate parts from multiple sources, from different technological bases, from entirely incompatible systems, and weld them together into something that actually works. This process, which Orks call looting, is more than simple scavenging. It represents a fundamental philosophy that everything has value, everything can be useful, and everything can be made to serve the purpose of war. Ork mech boys have been known to loot Imperial vehicles, Eldar technology, Tau weapon systems, and even the biomechanical constructs of the Tyranids, integrating these disparate elements into their own ramshackle war machines. The results are often absurd by conventional standards. A tank that combines the chassis of a Lehman Russ with the weapon systems of a Hammerhead, powered by an engine that was once part of a Trigon and painted bright red because that makes it go faster. This brings us to the moment of contact, the instant when an Ork warband encounters a Helbrute on the battlefield. To understand what happens next, we must imagine the scene with all its sensory details, all its visceral reality. Picture a world that has become a battleground, its surface scarred by artillery, and its skies darkened by the smoke of burning cities. The Orks have arrived in force, their crude but effective spacecraft disgorging thousands of greenskins who flood across the landscape like a green tide, seeking enemies to fight and plunder to claim. The Chaos Warband defending this world has deployed their assets carefully, setting up kill zones and defensive positions designed to channel and fragment the Ork advance. And as part of their defensive strategy, they have awakened one of their Helbrutes, that terrible fusion of damned warrior and corrupted machine. The pilot, whoever he once was, has been roused from whatever passes for sleep in his tormented existence, and the rage that defines his waking moments has been pointed toward the approaching greenskins. The Helbrute strides into battle like a walking nightmare, each step of its massive feet leaving craters in the ground. The weapons mounted on its chassis begin firing, the multi-melter on its left arm, reducing the first wave of Orks to clouds of superheated vapor, while the power fist on its right tears through a looted truck that had gotten too close. The Orks, in the immediate vicinity, are obliterated, their bodies torn apart by weapons designed to crack open armored vehicles. But the Orks behind them, those who witness the Helbrute's arrival, react in a way that would seem incomprehensible to any other species. They get excited. To an Ork, the Helbrute represents everything they love about warfare. It is big, vastly larger than any individual Ork. It is loud, its weapons producing the kind of thunderous noise that Orks associate with proper warfare. It is dangerous, having just demonstrated its capacity for violence in the most direct manner possible. And most importantly, it is a challenge, something that will require significant effort to bring down, making the eventual victory all the sweeter. The initial response from the Ork mob is a surge forward, dozens of greenskins charging directly at the Helbrute with a complete disregard for their own survival. They fire their weapons as they run, crude sluggers and choppers wielded with enthusiastic imprecision. Most of these rounds bounce harmlessly off the Helbrute's corrupted armor, but the Orks do not seem discouraged by this. If anything, the fact that their enemy can withstand such punishment only increases their enthusiasm. The Helbrute responds to this assault in the way its corrupted nature demands, with overwhelming violence. Its power fist swings in wide arcs, each blow sending broken Ork bodies flying through the air like ragdolls. Its multi-melter continues firing, the warp-tainted flames consuming everything they touch. For a few moments, it seems as though the Helbrute will single-handedly break the Ork advance, its sheer destructive capacity creating a barrier that even the fearless greenskins cannot cross. But Orks do not understand the concept of an unassailable position, where a human force might fall back and attempt to outflank such a powerful enemy, where Eldar would fade away and strike from an unexpected angle. The Orks simply keep coming. More and more greenskins throw themselves at the Helbrute, accepting casualties that would break the morale of any rational force. Some Orks are crushed under the Helbrute's feet as it advances. Others are caught by its power fist and reduced to pulp. Still others are immolated by its multi-melter, their bodies burning with flames that will not be extinguished by any normal means. And yet, the Orks keep coming, because this is what they were made to do. It is during this initial assault that something crucial happens, something that will define everything that follows. One of the Orks, a particularly large and scarred specimen who has clearly seen more than his share of combat, manages to close with the Helbrute without being killed. He dodges under a sweep of the power fist, rushes past the arc of the multi-melter's fire, and with a mighty leap, latches onto the Helbrute's leg. The corrupted war machine attempts to shake him off, but the Ork's grip is like iron, his fingers finding purchase in the warped armor plates. Other Orks see this and recognize an opportunity. If one of their number can close with the enemy, then others can too. The charge intensifies, with dozens of greenskins now attempting to emulate their bold comrade's success. Some are killed in the attempt, their bodies adding to the growing pile of corpses around the Helbrute, but others make it through, their hands finding holds on the Helbrute's legs, its torso, even its weapon arms. The Helbrute, designed to fight enemy vehicles and infantry formations at range, finds itself increasingly hampered by enemies who have gotten inside its effective combat radius. The Ork who first reached the Helbrute has now climbed up to its shoulder, where he begins attacking the armor plates with his chopper, the crude weapon sparking against the ceramite with each blow. He is shouting something, a battle cry in the guttural Ork language, and his words are taken up by the other Orks around him. The sound grows, becoming a roar that drowns out even the thunder of the Helbrute's weapons, a vocal manifestation of the greenskin enthusiasm for combat. Inside the Helbrute, the pilot is experiencing something he has not felt in a very long time: confusion. The pain is constant, as it always is, a background radiation of agony that defines every moment of his existence. The rage is there too, the burning fury that the Chaos Gods have cultivated within him, the desire to destroy everything that dares to exist in his presence. But beneath these familiar sensations, there is something new. These enemies are not behaving as enemies should. They are not retreating in the face of superior firepower. They are not showing fear at the display of overwhelming force. They are not even fighting with the desperate courage of those who know they will die, but choose to die with honor. Instead, they are fighting with joy. The Ork clinging to his shoulder is laughing as he hacks away at the armor plating, genuinely enjoying himself despite the very real possibility that he will be killed at any moment. The other Orks swarming over the Helbrute's body are shouting and cheering, treating this deadly combat like some kind of sporting event. The pilot, already driven half-mad by centuries of torment, finds this behavior so incomprehensible that it momentarily breaks through his rage-fueled focus. This moment of confusion is all the Orks need. The one on the Helbrute's shoulder finally succeeds in prying loose an armor plate, revealing the corrupted flesh and machinery beneath. Without hesitation, he plunges his chopper into the opening, the crude blade finding something vital. Alarms begin sounding within the Helbrute's systems, warning of damage to critical components. The pilot's rage returns in full force, no longer confused but now directed with laser focus at the pest who has dared to wound him. The Helbrute spins, trying to dislodge its attackers through sheer centrifugal force. Some Orks lose their grip and are thrown clear, sailing through the air to land with bone-breaking impacts dozens of meters away. But many more hold on, their fungal physiology giving them strength far beyond what their size would suggest. The Helbrute brings its power fist up, attempting to swat the Ork from its shoulder like a human might brush away an insect. The blow connects, and the Ork is crushed, his body reduced to a smear of organic matter across the Helbrute's armor. But the damage has been done. The hole in the armor plating is still there, and other Orks have seen it. They understand, in their simple and direct way, that they have found a weakness. More greenskins surge toward that opening, eager to exploit it. The Helbrute responds with increasing desperation, its movements becoming less controlled and more frantic. It stumbles, one massive foot coming down on several of its own allies, the Chaos cultists, who had been supporting its advance. The corrupted humans die screaming, but the Helbrute does not notice or care. Its entire focus is on the Orks, on eliminating these impossible enemies who refuse to die, refuse to flee, refuse to show proper fear in the face of a demigod of war. It is at this point that the nature of the encounter begins to shift. The initial assault has revealed that the Helbrute, for all its power, can be brought down through sheer weight of numbers and absolute fearlessness. But now, another element enters the equation. From the rear of the Ork mob, moving with a purpose that contrasts sharply with the chaotic enthusiasm of the boys around them, come the mech boys. These Orks are distinguished by their specialized equipment, the various tools and devices that mark them as the technological specialists of their species. They carry heavy wrenches and welding torches, power claws and cutting implements, everything they need to take apart and reassemble the machinery of war. And as they observe the Helbrute through their goggles and optical enhancers, they see not a terrifying enemy but a prize beyond measure. To a mech boy, the Helbrute represents the ultimate looting opportunity. Here is a piece of technology that combines the advanced engineering of the Adeptus Astartes with the corrupting influence of chaos, resulting in capabilities that exist at the intersection of the physical and the supernatural. The weapons systems alone would be worth the effort of claiming this prize. The armor plating, warped though it is, represents materials and construction techniques that even the most skilled mech boy could learn from. And the power core, the heart of the machine that keeps it functioning despite damage that would disable any normal vehicle, that is something that could be integrated into a project of truly massive proportions. The lead mech boy, a particularly grizzled specimen whose body is covered in burn scars and crude cybernetic enhancements, makes a decision. He begins bellowing orders to his assistants and the regular boys around him, directing them to focus their attacks on the Helbrute's legs. The goal is no longer to destroy this enemy, but to disable it, to bring it down without causing so much damage that it cannot be salvaged. This represents a significant shift in tactics, requiring a level of restraint that does not come naturally to Orks. But the promise of loot is a powerful motivator, and the mech boys' authority in matters of technology is absolute. The Orks adjust their assault, concentrating their fire on the Helbrute's knee joints, the vulnerable points where the massive leg segments connect to the hip structure. Rockets and crack grenades, weapons usually reserved for vehicle killing roles, are brought to bear against these specific targets. The Helbrute attempts to maintain its position, but the focused fire begins to tell. Warning lights flare in the pilot's vision as structural integrity alarms sound. One leg buckles, the knee joint giving way under the sustained assault. The Helbrute topples, its massive bulk crashing to the ground with an impact that sends up clouds of dust and debris. For a moment, everything seems to pause, as if the battlefield itself is holding its breath. Then, with a roar that eclipses all previous noise, the Orks surge forward. They swarm over the fallen Helbrute like ants on a dead beetle. Their numbers so great that the war machine's form becomes almost invisible beneath the mass of green bodies. The Helbrute is not defeated. Not yet. Even prone, it is still incredibly dangerous. Its power fist continues to sweep through the Orks, pressing in around it, each blow killing multiple greenskins. Its multi-melter, though now pointed at an awkward angle, keeps firing, the warp-tainted flames consuming everything in their path. Orks die by the dozens, their bodies falling in heaps around the fallen war machine. But for every Ork that dies, two more seem to take its place. The endless tide of green bodies, pressing forward with absolute determination. Inside his sarcophagus, the pilot experiences something he has not felt since his interment. Genuine fear. Not fear of death, for death would be a mercy he stopped hoping for centuries ago, but fear of what these creatures might do to him. The Orks show no signs of trying to finish him off, to grant him the release of destruction. Instead, they seem intent on capturing him, on taking him apart while he still lives. The prospect of being disassembled by these crude Xenos, of having his tormented existence continue in some new and even more degrading form, fills him with a horror that cuts through even his chaos-induced madness. He fights with renewed desperation, channeling every ounce of strength his corrupted form possesses. The power fist swings faster, the multi-melter burns hotter. For a few moments, it seems as though he might actually succeed in driving back the green tide through sheer ferocity. Orc bodies pile higher around him, the corpses forming barriers that other orcs must climb over to reach their prey. But the mech boys have arrived at the fallen Helbrute, and they bring with them tools specifically designed for disassembling war machines. Heavy power claws begin cutting through the Helbrute's armor, slicing away sections of ceramite that had withstood countless battles. Welding torches burn through power cables and hydraulic lines, systematically disabling the Helbrute's weapons and mobility systems. The pilot can feel each violation, each wound inflicted on his mechanical body registering as fresh agony in his tormented consciousness. The orcs work with remarkable efficiency, their movements coordinated in a way that seems at odds with their usually chaotic behavior. The mech boys call out instructions, directing their assistants to cut here, to reinforce there, to apply leverage at specific points. They have done this before, countless times, taking apart every conceivable type of vehicle and weapon system. The fact that this particular prize contains a living, suffering consciousness makes no difference to their methodology. As the dismantling continues, the Helbrute's systems begin failing one by one. First, the multi-melter goes dark, its power feed severed by an orc cutting torch. Then the power fist locks up, its actuators disabled by targeted damage to the control systems. The pilot finds himself increasingly helpless, trapped within his tomb, as it is systematically torn apart around him. He tries to scream, but even his vox speakers have been disabled. He tries to resist, to move, to fight back in any way possible. But the orcs have paralyzed his mechanical body with almost surgical precision. Finally, inevitably, the mech boys reach the sarcophagus itself, the armored chamber at the heart of the Helbrute, where the pilot's broken body is sealed away. They pause for a moment, studying this central component with something approaching reverence. This is the prize they have been working toward, the ultimate mystery of this strange war machine. They begin carefully, more carefully than orcs usually work, cutting away the outer layers of armor to reveal the sarcophagus within. When they finally breach the inner chamber, what they find gives even these hardened veterans of countless battles a moment of pause. The thing inside is barely recognizable as something that was once a space marine. Centuries of torment have twisted the pilot's flesh in ways that defy description, his body fused with the machinery in patterns that seem to serve no function beyond causing pain. His face, if it can still be called that, is locked in an eternal expression of agony and rage. Tubes and cables penetrate his body at dozens of points, some feeding him the nutrients necessary to sustain life, others merely inflicting sensation for the sake of the suffering itself. The mech boys are delighted. This is exactly the kind of complex, interesting technology they live to loot and repurpose. They begin discussing among themselves, their guttural language punctuated by gestures and the occasional diagrams scratched in the dirt. They are already planning what they will do with their prize, how they will integrate its components into their own projects. The pilot, still conscious despite everything, can only watch through failing optics as these crude aliens decide his fate. And this is where the truly remarkable thing happens, the moment that defines the entire encounter between orcs and Helbrutes. Instead of destroying the pilot, instead of ending his torment, or even attempting to understand the suffering they have uncovered, the mech boys begin planning how to incorporate the entire sarcophagus into one of their own war machines. They see the pilot not as a person, not as a victim of chaos corruption, but simply as a component, a fascinating piece of technology that might be useful for their own purposes. They load the sarcophagus, pilot and all, onto a crude transport vehicle, securing it with chains and welded plates. The pilot tries to protest, tries to explain the horror of what they are doing, but his voice is gone, his vox speakers destroyed in the earlier fighting. He can only experience this new violation in silence, trapped within his mechanical tomb as it is carried away by these alien scavengers. The journey to the orc encampment takes hours. during which the pilot has ample time to contemplate his new circumstances. He has gone from being a weapon of chaos, a terror on the battlefield, to being loot, a prize claimed by enemies who do not even understand what he truly is. The humiliation is almost worse than the physical agony, a new layer of suffering added to his already unbearable existence. When they arrive at the Ork workshop, the mech boys waste no time in beginning their work. They weld the sarcophagus to the chassis of a half-built vehicle, some monstrosity that combines elements from a dozen different sources. The pilot finds himself becoming part of a looted wagon, his consciousness and his suffering integrated into an Ork war machine. They do not understand the chaos corruption that permeates his being. They do not recognize the warp-tainted nature of his power core. They simply see interesting technology and incorporate it with enthusiastic disregard for the consequences. As the days pass, the pilot discovers that his new situation brings unexpected complications. The Ork technology that has been grafted onto his sarcophagus operates according to principles he does not understand, principles that seem to violate everything he knows about how reality should function. Weapons that should not fire do so anyway. Systems that should fail catastrophically somehow continue operating. And all of it is powered not just by his corrupted machinery, but by the gestalt psychic field of the Orks themselves. He finds that he can still influence the weapon systems, can still direct fire at targets, though the targets are now chosen by the Ork driver rather than his own tactical assessment. He is no longer a free agent, but a component, a gun that can think but has no control over where it is pointed. The Ork driving the looted wagon treats him with the same casual affection that a human might show a favorite tool, occasionally patting the sarcophagus and making encouraging noises when the weapons fire particularly effectively. The first time the looted wagon is deployed in battle, the pilot experiences something he never expected. He finds himself fighting alongside Orks against forces of the Imperium. The irony is not lost on him. He who was once a space marine, sworn to defend humanity against all threats, then became a servant of chaos, dedicated to destroying that same Imperium, and now has become a weapon in the hands of Xenos. The degradation is complete. The fall from grace reaching depths he had not imagined possible. But something else happens too. Something that the pilot cannot quite articulate, even to himself. The Orks' enthusiasm for battle, their genuine joy in combat, begins to affect him in ways he does not understand. The gestalt psychic field that powers their ramshackle technology also touches his consciousness, and he finds that some of their emotional state bleeds through into his own awareness. The rage that has defined his existence for centuries is still there, but now it is mixed with something that might almost be called enjoyment. He fires his weapons not just because targets present themselves, but because firing is what he is supposed to do, what he was made to do, and there is a certain satisfaction in fulfilling that purpose. The pain is still there, the agony that never fades, but it seems somehow more bearable when experienced in the context of a battle that the Orks are clearly winning. And when the Ork driver pats his sarcophagus and shouts encouragement after a particularly good shot, the pilot feels something he cannot name, something that might be the distant echo of pride. This is not redemption. The pilot is still damned, still suffering, still locked in his prison of flesh and metal. The chaos corruption that permeates his being has not been cleansed or forgiven. But in the strangest possible way, his existence has gained a new dimension. He is no longer simply experiencing torment for the sake of the dark god's amusement. Now he is part of something, a component in a greater machine, and that machine has a purpose beyond mere suffering. The psychological impact of this change on the pilot's consciousness is profound. The madness that had been consuming him, the fragmentary personalities and gibbering insanity born from centuries of isolation and pain, begins to consolidate around this new purpose. He is still broken, still twisted by chaos, but now that brokenness has direction. He becomes focused on being the best weapon he can be, on serving his function within the looted wagon with as much skill as he can muster. The Orks notice the change, though they do not understand it. They observe that their looted wagon's weapons seem to fire more accurately, that the targeting systems respond more precisely to their commands. They attribute this to their own skill in integrating the salvaged components, never suspecting that the improvement comes from the tortured consciousness at the machine's heart, a consciousness that has found in their crude acceptance something that none of its former masters ever provided, a reason to continue existing beyond mere survival. But this is not a story of redemption or hope. This is Warhammer 40,000, and there are no happy endings in the grim darkness of the far future. The looted wagon, with its unwitting pilot, continues to serve in battle after battle, racking up an impressive tally of destroyed enemies. But each battle brings fresh damage, new wounds to the already broken systems. The Orks repair what they can, welding patches over holes, replacing destroyed components with whatever scrap they have available. But there is only so much that can be fixed, especially when the repairs are being performed by creatures who work more from instinct than understanding. The pilot feels his systems degrading, feels the slow accumulation of damage that even the Orks' surprisingly effective maintenance cannot prevent. There comes a day when the looted wagon rolls into battle one last time, its frame held together more by Ork optimism than structural integrity. The enemy this time is a force of Chaos Space Marines, warriors who recognize the signature of the corrupted technology the Orks have incorporated into their war machine. The battle is brief and brutal. The Chaos Marines focus their fire on the looted wagon, recognizing in it the desecrated remains of what was once one of their own. The Ork driver, brave to the last, charges directly at the enemy lines, firing every weapon the wagon possesses. The pilot, feeling the end approaching, pours every ounce of his remaining strength into making this final assault as destructive as possible. If he must die again, truly die this time, then he will take as many of these traitors with him as he can. The looted wagon explodes in a burst of blue-white flame, the corrupted power core finally giving way under the sustained damage. The Ork driver dies instantly, atomized by energies he never understood. The pilot, his consciousness finally severed from the machinery that had sustained it for so long, has a moment of perfect clarity. In that instant before oblivion, he thinks about his journey, about the space marine he once was, the chaos-corrupted monster he became, and the strange half-life he experienced as part of an Ork war machine. And in that final moment, he experiences something he had not felt in longer than he could measure: gratitude. Not for his suffering, not for his damnation, but for those last weeks or months of existence where his pain had purpose, where his existence served a function beyond mere torment. The Orks, in their simple and brutal way, had given him what neither the Imperium nor the Chaos Gods had provided: a reason to continue fighting that went beyond orders or corruption. They had treated him not as a holy relic or a damned soul, but simply as a tool to be used. And in that casual acceptance, they had granted him a strange kind of peace. Then consciousness fades, and whatever remained of the warrior he once was finally finds the release that had been denied for so long. The Orks who survive the battle will loot the wreckage of the looted wagon, salvaging whatever components they can from the twisted metal and broken machinery. They will use these parts in new projects, never knowing or caring about the consciousness that once inhabited them. And somewhere in that wreckage, so corrupted by chaos and Ork technology that no one could say where one ends and the other begins, a fragment of a sarcophagus will be welded to a new war machine, carrying forward echoes of the suffering and strange redemption that defined its history. This brings us to a broader examination of what these encounters reveal about the nature of both Orks and Helbrutes, and about the galaxy they inhabit. The interaction between these two forces represents a collision of philosophies so fundamentally different that they might as well exist in separate realities. The Helbrute embodies suffering, its existence defined by the conscious experience of unending torment inflicted by beings who feed on such agony. The Orks embody joy, their existence defined by the unconscious pursuit of combat for its own sake, finding fulfillment in violence without any need for deeper meaning. When these philosophies collide, something remarkable emerges. The Helbrute's suffering, which is supposed to be eternal and inescapable, becomes contextualized in a new way. The Orks do not understand or care about the pilot's torment. They see only a machine to be looted, a prize to be claimed and repurposed. This casual disregard for the carefully constructed hell that the Chaos Gods have created is almost insulting in its simplicity. The Dark Gods craft elaborate torments designed to extract maximum suffering from their victims, and the Orks respond by turning those victims into components for their war machines, treating millennia-old grudges and cosmic horror with all the reverence they might show a particularly shiny bit of scrap metal. This reveals something profound about the Orks' place in the galaxy. They are, in many ways, immune to the existential horror that defines the 41st millennium. The grim darkness of the far future affects them not at all, because they lack the capacity to perceive it as grim or dark. They see only opportunities for fighting, and fighting is what they love. The Imperium struggles under the weight of dogma and decay. The Eldar mourn their fallen empire. The Tau pursue their doomed dream of the greater good, and the forces of chaos writhe in eternal torment or ecstasy. But the Orks simply fight. And in fighting, find a completeness that no other faction can match. The Helbrute, meanwhile, represents the ultimate expression of grimdark philosophy. It is the soldier who can never retire, the warrior who is denied even the dignity of death, the hero whose reward for service is eternal suffering. It embodies every cautionary tale about the price of glory and the nature of sacrifice. When Imperial citizens are told that their sons might become space marines, might rise to become heroes of the Imperium, they are not told that the ultimate end of that path might be interment in a dreadnought, and they are certainly not told that if their son falls to chaos, he might spend eternity trapped in a machine that amplifies his suffering rather than granting peace. The Orcs' ability to simply loot a Helbrute and repurpose it without any concern for the metaphysical implications is almost comedic in its directness. Where a human tech priest might spend weeks in prayer and purification before even approaching such a corrupted artifact, where an Eldar might see the tainted machine as an abomination to be destroyed at all costs, the Orcs see only a really good gun that needs to be bolted onto something that can move it around. This pragmatic approach cuts through all the layers of meaning and symbolism that other factions heap onto their technology, reducing the Helbrute from a monument to suffering to simply another piece of salvage. But there is a darker implication lurking beneath this seemingly simple interaction. The Orc Gestalt psychic field, which allows their technology to function through collective belief, begins to interact with the chaos corruption that permeates the Helbrute. These are two fundamentally different types of supernatural influence, operating according to incompatible rules. The chaos corruption follows the twisted logic of the warp, where emotion becomes reality and symbols have power beyond their physical form. The Orc field follows no logic at all, operating on pure collective conviction, without any need for rational connection between cause and effect. When these forces meet, strange things begin to happen. The chaos corruption, designed to cause suffering and spread its influence, finds itself constrained by the Orc belief that their looted technology works because they say it works. The Helbrute systems, which should be unstable and prone to catastrophic failure, become somehow more reliable when operated by Orcs, who simply assume they will function properly. The warp-tainted weapons, meant to spread corruption with every shot, find their malevolent influence diluted by the Orcs' absolute confidence that they are just really good guns. This creates a kind of metaphysical feedback loop. The more the Orcs use the looted Helbrute components, the more those components begin to function according to Orc principles rather than chaos principles. The corruption is still there, but it becomes subordinate to the Gestalt field, transformed from a deliberate evil into simply another aspect of the ramshackle collection of parts that make up Orc technology. In some cases, this might actually reduce the suffering of the pilot trapped within, as the chaos energies that deliberately inflict pain find themselves overpowered by the Orc conviction that their machines should work efficiently. Of course, this is not universal. Some Helbrutes looted by Orcs become even more unstable, the combination of chaos, corruption, and Orc technology, creating something that operates on principles drawn from both sources. These hybrid machines are dangerous even by Orc standards. Prone to firing at random, moving with unpredictable violence, and sometimes simply exploding for no apparent reason. The Orks, characteristically, respond to this unpredictability not with caution, but with enthusiasm. A gun that might fire at anything, including friendly forces, is just more exciting to use. A vehicle that might explode without warning just means that the driver needs to be ready for anything. The psychological impact on the Helbrute's pilot in these cases is difficult to describe. Imagine existing in a state of constant agony, with your consciousness anchored to that pain as the only fixed point in your existence. Now imagine that anchor becoming unstable, the suffering that defines you being occasionally overridden by the absolute certainty of the Orks that their machine works the way they think it should. The pilot might experience moments of reduced pain when the Ork gestalt field is particularly strong, only to have that pain come roaring back when the field weakens. This oscillation between different states of torment could be argued to be even worse than consistent suffering, as it robs the pilot of even the grim comfort of predictability. There are documented cases in Imperial records of Ork war machines that exhibit what tech priests describe as inconsistent corruption signatures, technology that shows signs of chaos taint, but does not behave in ways consistent with such corruption. These reports often include references to unusual weapon effects, armor that seems to repair itself through mechanisms that violate known principles of materials science, and power cores that operate at levels that should be impossible given their design. Inquisitors examining these reports have theorized that they might be observing Helbrutes or other Chaos war machines that have been looted and repurposed by Orks, creating hybrid systems that operate according to multiple contradictory sets of rules simultaneously. The practical implications of this phenomenon extend beyond individual encounters. If Orks are able to loot and repurpose Chaos technology without being corrupted by it, if they can take the carefully crafted instruments of the Dark Gods and turn them into crude but effective weapons that serve their own purposes, then they represent a threat to Chaos in ways that other factions do not. The Imperium fights Chaos through faith and dogma, attempting to create bulwarks of belief that can withstand the tide of corruption. The Eldar fight through knowledge and precision, using their understanding of the warp to counter its influence. But the Orks fight simply by not caring, by being too focused on the immediate joy of combat, to be seduced by promises of power or corrupted by exposure to forbidden knowledge. This is why encounters between Orks and Chaos forces often have outcomes that surprise observers from other factions. Where a human army might be weakened by prolonged exposure to Chaos corruption, an Ork warband tends to get more excited the longer the fighting continues. Where an Eldar force might suffer psychological trauma from witnessing demonic manifestations, Orks see only new types of enemies to fight. The Chaos gods can offer Orks nothing they do not already have. They live for combat, and they have that in abundance. They care nothing for power beyond the ability to fight more effectively. They have no complex emotions to twist and no subtle ambitions to corrupt. They simply are, existing in a state of permanent enthusiasm for violence that requires no external reinforcement. This brings us to perhaps the most important question. What does the looting of Helbrutes tell us about the nature of suffering in the Warhammer 40,000 universe? The Helbrute exists as a symbol of inescapable torment, a being trapped in a state of eternal agony that serves as both punishment and warning. The Chaos gods take delight in this suffering, treating it as proof of their power and the inevitability of despair. But when an Ork loots a Helbrute and incorporates it into their ramshackle war machine, that symbolism is stripped away. The suffering becomes just another component, no more or less significant than the engine or the wheels. This casual desecration of meaning is perhaps the ultimate insult to Chaos. The Dark Gods invest enormous effort into crafting specific torments, into creating hierarchies of suffering that reflect their particular preferences and philosophies. Khorne's victims experience rage and violence, Nurgle's know decay and despair, Slanesh's feel pleasure twisted into agony, and Siencha's suffer through the realization that all their plans lead to nothing. But none of this matters to an Ork mechboy who sees only interesting technology to loot. The careful cultivation of suffering becomes irrelevant when the sufferer is simply bolted onto a truck and used to shoot enemies. Does this mean that the Orks somehow provide relief to looted Helbrute pilots? The answer is complicated. On one level, no. The physical agony remains, the corruption is still present, and the pilot is still trapped in their mechanical tomb. But on another level, something does change. The context of that suffering shifts from being the point of the existence to being an incidental side effect of being a useful tool. This might seem like a minor distinction, but for a consciousness that has spent centuries experiencing torment as its primary reason for existence, even this small shift can be significant. Consider the difference between being tortured and being hurt while performing a task. The physical sensation might be identical, but the psychological experience is vastly different. Torture is pain deliberately inflicted for its own sake, suffering that exists only to create more suffering. But pain experienced while performing a function, even an unpleasant one, has context and meaning beyond itself. It becomes endurable because it serves a purpose, even if that purpose is simply to keep functioning as part of a larger system. When an Ork loots a Helbrute, the pilot's suffering stops being the point and becomes merely a condition under which they continue to operate. The Orks neither know nor care about the torment being experienced within the machine they have claimed. They provide no comfort and no sympathy, but they also impose no additional cruelty. They simply use the weapon they have acquired, and in doing so, they transform the pilot's existence from pure suffering into suffering with purpose. This is not redemption. The pilot is still damned, still serving forces they once swore to fight, still trapped in an existence that should never have continued beyond their original death. But it is change, and in the stagnant, cycling nightmare of chaos corruption, change itself can be a kind of mercy. The pilot is no longer frozen in an eternal moment of agony, waiting only for the next awakening to bring fresh opportunities for violence that will lead nowhere except back to sleep and dreams of torment. Now they are part of something that moves forward, that has goals however simple, and that values their contribution however unknowingly. The irony, of course, is that the Orks provide this strange form of relief entirely by accident. They have no concept of the psychological implications of their looting. They do not understand that they are offering a form of salvation to beings trapped in carefully crafted hells. They simply see cool technology and take it, integrating it into their ramshackle war machines with the same casual enthusiasm they bring to everything else. The fact that this act of simple pragmatism undermines millennia of carefully cultivated torment is just a bonus they are completely unaware of. This brings us to examine specific historical examples of Ork Helbrute encounters that have been documented in Imperial records. While information about such events is often fragmented and unreliable, pieced together from battlefield reports and inquisitorial investigations, there are several cases that stand out for their illuminating details. The Battle of Kragoth Prime provides one such example. A warband of World-Eaters, the Chaos Space Marines dedicated to Khorne, had deployed several Helbrutes as part of their assault on an Imperial hive city. These particular Helbrutes were ancient even by Chaos standards, their pilots having served in the Great Crusade before the heresy, making them witnesses to the fall of Angron and the descent of their legion into madness. The suffering of these pilots had been refined over 10 millennia, their agony cultivated into something approaching an art form by the devotees of the Blood God. An Ork invasion force arrived on Kragoth Prime, while the battle between the World-Eaters and the Imperial defenders was still raging. The Orks, characteristically, decided to attack both sides simultaneously, seeing no reason to choose between two groups of perfectly good enemies to fight. In the chaos of the three-way battle, several of the World-Eaters' Helbrutes were disabled and subsequently looted by Ork mechboys. The World-Eaters, discovering that their sacred engines of war had been claimed by Xenos, were filled with a rage that exceeded even their usual fury. They launched a desperate counterattack to reclaim the Helbrutes, not because the machines were strategically valuable, but because the idea of their honored ancients being defiled by greenskins was intolerable. The resulting battle saw Khorne-worshipping Chaos Marines fighting with a focused intensity usually absent from their berserker charges, attempting to destroy the looted wagons that now incorporated their former brothers. The Orks, for their part, were delighted by this turn of events. Not only were they getting to fight enemies who were properly angry and aggressive, but those enemies seemed specifically interested in the particular war machines the Orks had just acquired, which made those machines seem even more valuable. The mech boys began adding additional armor and weapons to the looted wagons, determined to prove that their looting skills were superior to whatever the Chaos Marines thought was so special about these particular machines. What the surviving Imperial observers reported about this battle was particularly noteworthy. The looted wagons, incorporating the Helbrute technology, began firing with unusual accuracy, their weapons tracking targets with a precision that seemed inconsistent with Ork technology standards. Some observers speculated that the pilots trapped within, faced with the prospect of being destroyed by their former brothers, were actively cooperating with their Ork captors, choosing to fight alongside Xenos rather than be reclaimed by the forces of Khorne. This raises fascinating questions about the psychology of chaos, corruption, and the possibility of redemption, or at least change, even for those who have fallen to the dark gods. If a Helbrute pilot would rather serve Orks than return to chaos, what does that say about the nature of service to the ruinous powers? The traditional understanding is that chaos corruption is absolute, that once a soul has been claimed by the dark gods, it cannot turn away or change allegiance. But perhaps the reality is more complex. Perhaps consciousness, no matter how corrupted, retains some capacity for choice, and when presented with alternatives, might select the option that offers the most bearable existence. Another documented case occurred during the Third War for Armageddon, that massive conflict that saw the largest Ork invasion force in millennia clash with the combined might of the Imperium. Among the Chaos forces that attempted to exploit the confusion of that war was a warband of Iron Warriors, known for their siege warfare expertise and their cynical pragmatism. The Iron Warriors had deployed several Helbrutes equipped with siege weaponry, intending to use them to break through the defenses of strategic hive cities. These Helbrutes were claimed by the Goth clan, one of the largest and most aggressive Ork groups involved in the Armageddon conflict. The Goths, known for their love of close combat and their tendency to paint everything black because they believe black makes things harder, saw the siege weaponry on the looted Helbrutes as perfect for their style of warfare. They integrated the machines into their assault formations, using the heavy weapons to blast open fortifications before charging in to fight the defenders hand to hand. What made this case particularly notable was the Iron Warriors' response. Unlike the World Eaters, who had reacted with mindless rage, the Iron Warriors approached the problem with cold logic. They attempted to reclaim their Helbrutes, not through direct assault, but through subterfuge and calculation. They deployed teams of Chaos Marines, disguised as loyalists, attempted to plant viruses in the Ork Gestalt field to make the looted wagons malfunction, and even tried to remotely trigger the Helbrute's self-destruct mechanisms. None of these tactics worked, largely because the Orks had so thoroughly modified the looted technology that it no longer functioned according to its original specifications. The Iron Warriors carefully planned attacks, targeted systems that no longer existed or had been so altered by Ork tinkering that they bore no resemblance to their original design. The result was a series of operations that failed, not through superior opposition, but through sheer irrelevance. The Iron Warriors' tactical brilliance rendered meaningless by the Orks' complete disregard for how things were supposed to work. The psychological impact of this failure on the Iron Warriors cannot be understated. They pride themselves on their rationality, their ability to overcome any obstacle through application of logic and superior planning. To be defeated not by a better plan but by enemies who operated without any plan at all, who succeeded through ignorance rather than insight, was perhaps more frustrating than any loss on the battlefield. Some Iron Warriors who participated in the failed recovery operations reportedly suffered mental breakdowns, their carefully constructed worldviews unable to accommodate the reality of Orks successfully operating technology that should not function. A third case worth examining occurred on the world of Mordian during an incursion by the Alpha Legion. The Alpha Legion, known for their elaborate schemes and preference for covert operations, had deployed Helbrutes as false flag units, disguising them to appear as loyalist dreadnoughts to sow confusion among Imperial defenders. When Orks attacked the planet, they made no distinction between real and disguised units, looting both with equal enthusiasm. The Alpha Legion's response was perhaps the most interesting of any Chaos force faced with looted Helbrutes. Rather than attempting to reclaim or destroy the looted machines, they began studying how the Orks had integrated them, trying to understand the principles that allowed such obviously defective modifications to function. Some Alpha Legion operatives even attempted to infiltrate Ork mobs to observe the mech boys at work, hoping to learn techniques that might be applicable to their own operations. This approach reflects the Alpha Legion's general philosophy of adaptation and learning from all sources, even unlikely ones. But it also reveals something important about the nature of Ork technology. The fact that even the Alpha Legion, with their vast experience and willingness to use any tactic no matter how unorthodox, could not fully understand or replicate Ork modifications suggests that the Gestalt psychic field is not simply a tool, but a fundamental aspect of Ork existence that cannot be separated from their biology and culture. These historical examples collectively illustrate several important principles about Ork-Helbrute interactions. First, they demonstrate that Orks are capable of successfully looting and repurposing Chaos technology, despite all the corruption and malevolence built into such machines. Second, they show that Chaos forces, regardless of their specific allegiance or tactical philosophy, are consistently unable to prevent or reverse this looting once it has occurred. Third, and perhaps most significantly, they suggest that the pilots trapped within, looted Helbrutes, may actually experience a change in their condition, though whether this constitutes improvement or simply a different form of suffering remains unclear. The broader implications of these interactions extend beyond individual battles or campaigns. They touch on fundamental questions about the nature of technology, consciousness, and suffering in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. When the Orks strip away the symbolic and metaphysical significance that other factions invest in their technology, they reveal a truth that many find uncomfortable. In the end, machines are machines, no matter what gods have blessed or cursed them. The Helbrute is a prison of torment when operated by Chaos forces, because that is its intended purpose, but it becomes simply a weapon when operated by Orks, because they recognize only its functional value. This pragmatic approach to technology represents a kind of philosophical challenge to the carefully constructed hierarchies and meanings that define other factions. The Imperium treats its technology with religious reverence, seeing the machine spirit as a sacred entity that must be appeased through ritual and prayer. Chaos corrupts technology deliberately, transforming functional machines into instruments of suffering and symbols of their power. Even the Eldar and Tau, despite their more rational approaches, invest their technology with cultural significance that goes beyond mere function. Only the Orks strip away all of this overlay, treating technology as nothing more or less than tools to be used, modified, and discarded when no longer useful. This reduction of complex metaphysical constructs to simple utility is almost insulting in its directness, and yet it proves remarkably effective. An Ork-looted wagon that incorporates Helbrute components works, despite violating every principle of engineering and spiritual harmony that other factions hold dear. It works because the Orks believe it will work, and their collective faith in their own technology is powerful enough to override the malevolent intentions of the Chaos gods themselves. The question of whether this represents some form of salvation for the Helbrute pilots remains open to interpretation. On one hand, they are still trapped, still suffering, still far from any peace or redemption. On the other hand, their suffering has been transformed from the point of their existence to merely an aspect of it, from deliberate torture to incidental discomfort. Whether this distinction matters depends on one's perspective on consciousness, suffering, and the possibility of meaning in a universe defined by endless war. To fully understand the complexity of these interactions, we must examine how different Ork clans approach the looting of Helbrutes, as each clan brings its own cultural priorities and technical preferences to the salvage process. The Goths, for instance, represent the most straightforward approach to Helbrute looting. These Orks are obsessed with close combat and physical strength, valuing brute force over subtlety in all aspects of warfare. When a Goth warband captures a Helbrute, Their mech boys typically focus on maximizing the machine's ability to get into melee range and deliver devastating close-range attacks. This means stripping away any sophisticated long-range targeting systems and replacing them with simple, robust mechanisms that can withstand the shock of close combat. The Goths will often add additional armor plating to the front of the looted Helbrute, turning it into a mobile battering ram that can smash through enemy lines. They paint everything black, of course, because black is proper and makes things harder to kill. The pilot trapped within such a machine experiences combat in a fundamentally different way than they did under Chaos control. Instead of engaging enemies at calculated distances, they find themselves thrust into the heart of melee combat, surrounded by the roar and fury of orcs fighting at close quarters. The psychological impact of this change can be profound. Many Helbrute pilots were originally tactical marines or devastators, warriors trained to engage enemies at range and destroy them with concentrated firepower. To be forced into melee combat, to feel the impact of enemy weapons striking the hull at close range, to be unable to maintain the calculated distance that tactical doctrine demands, this can be deeply unsettling. But for pilots who were once assault marines or close combat specialists, the transition might feel more natural, even comfortable. They might find in the Goth style of warfare an echo of what they once enjoyed before their fall and subsequent torment. The Bad Moons clan approaches Helbrute looting from an entirely different perspective. These orcs are the richest of their kind, their teeth growing faster than other clans, giving them more currency to spend on weapons and equipment. When Bad Moon's mech boys get their hands on a Helbrute, they see an opportunity to create the flashiest, most ostentatious war machine possible. They add extra guns, lots of them, mounting weapon systems taken from a dozen different sources. They paint the machine bright yellow, their clan color, and add decorative elements like gold paint and shiny bits of metal that serve no function beyond looking impressive. The result is a looted wagon that might mount a plasma cannon taken from a Space Marine tank, a burst cannon looted from Tau vehicles, a scatter laser from Eldar technology, and the original Helbrute weapons, all integrated into a single platform that by all rights should tear itself apart from conflicting power requirements and incompatible targeting systems. But it works, because the Bad Moons believe it works, and their collective wealth allows them to maintain this absurd collection of firepower through constant repairs and modifications. For the pilot trapped within such a machine, the experience is one of sensory overload. The targeting systems are receiving input from multiple incompatible sources simultaneously. The power draw from all these different weapons creates fluctuations that would normally cause catastrophic system failures. The Ork driver is constantly firing different weapons at different targets, treating the entire arsenal like a massive shotgun rather than precision instruments. The pilot, if they retain any tactical sense, might find this approach maddening, watching as perfectly good firing solutions are wasted because the Ork driver decided to shoot at something else because it looked more fun. The Death Skulls represent yet another approach to Helbrute looting, and perhaps the most philosophically interesting one. These Orks believe that blue is lucky, and they believe in looting with a fervor that exceeds even the normal Ork enthusiasm for salvage. When Death Skull's mech boys capture a Helbrute, they do not simply bolt it onto an existing vehicle. Instead, they take it apart completely, analyzing every component, understanding how each piece functions, and then reassembling it in ways that make sense according to Ork logic, rather than its original design. This process is remarkably thorough. The Death Skulls will strip the Helbrute down to its fundamental components, separating the corrupted power core from the weapons systems, the targeting arrays from the mobility units, the armor plating from the structural frame. They will then paint every single piece blue, because luck is important when working with technology you do not fully understand. Then they rebuild, but not necessarily in the same configuration. A Helbrute's power fist might become the motive force for a Death Dread. The multi-melter might be integrated into a battle fortress. The armor plating might be used to reinforce a dozen different vehicles. For the pilot, this represents perhaps the most extreme transformation possible. Their consciousness, which has been bound to the complete Helbrute chassis, suddenly finds itself distributed across multiple systems or concentrated into a single component that is now serving a completely different function. Some pilots report, in the rare instances when their Vox systems remain functional, experiencing a kind of fragmentation, as if their awareness has been split across the various components the Death Skulls have scattered across their war machine inventory. Others find themselves more focused, their consciousness compressed into a single system where it operates with surprising clarity despite the continued suffering. The Blood Axes, those Orks who have learned tactics and organization from fighting against and alongside Imperial forces, bring a different kind of sophistication to Helbrute looting. When Blood Axes mech boys capture a Helbrute, they actually attempt to understand its original function and maintain some of that functionality in their repurposed version. This does not mean they follow the original design specifications, of course, but they recognize that the Helbrute was designed to fulfill certain battlefield roles, and they try to preserve those capabilities while integrating them into Ork technology. This approach sometimes produces results that are surprisingly effective by Imperial standards. Blood Axes, looted wagons, incorporating Helbrute technology, have been known to execute combined arms tactics, coordinate with other units, and even maintain something approaching fire discipline when necessary. The pilots trapped within these machines might find the experience less jarring than serving under other clans. The Blood Axe's willingness to use actual tactics rather than simply charging forward creates a combat environment that has some resemblance to what the pilot experienced in their previous existence, whether as a loyalist or a traitor. However, this relative sophistication comes with its own form of psychological torture. The pilot can see what the Blood Axes are trying to do tactically, can recognize the patterns and principles that guide their operations, but must watch as these attempts are undermined by the fundamental orkishness of the forces involved. A perfectly good flanking maneuver will be abandoned halfway through because the Orks got bored and decided to charge directly at the enemy instead. A well-planned ambush will be triggered too early because one Ork couldn't resist the urge to start shooting. The pilot experiences the frustration of recognizing sound tactical principles being employed by creatures utterly incapable of following through on them consistently. The Evil Sun's clan presents perhaps the most chaotic looting experience for captured Helbrutes. These Orks are obsessed with speed, painting everything red because red makes things go faster. When Evil Sun's mech boys get their hands on a Helbrute, they immediately begin modifying it for maximum velocity. They strip away heavy armor to reduce weight, replace the standard mobility systems with salvaged engines that produce far more power than the frame was designed to handle, and add various speed-enhancing modifications that may or may not actually affect velocity, but definitely make the vehicle more dangerous to operate. The result is a looted wagon that moves at speeds that would terrify any sane operator. The pilot, trapped within their sarcophagus, experiences acceleration forces that their biological components were never designed to withstand. The corrupted systems that keep them alive struggle to compensate for the constant high-speed maneuvering. Warning alarms sound constantly, indicating structural stress that would normally require immediate attention. But the Evil Sun's driver ignores all of this, focused only on going faster than anyone else on the battlefield. For pilots who were once speed freaks themselves, who perhaps served in bike squads or assault units that prized rapid deployment, this experience might actually prove exhilarating despite the suffering. The sheer velocity, the sensation of movement without the normal constraints of safety or common sense, could awaken memories of when speed represented freedom rather than imprisonment. For pilots who preferred more measured, tactical approaches, the constant high-speed chaos becomes yet another form of torment, unable to slow down or exercise control over their trajectory. The Snakebites represent the most primitive Ork clan, rejecting advanced technology in favor of traditional methods and close connection to their fungal origins. When Snakebite mechboys, rare as they are, encounter a Helbrute, they approach it with deep suspicion. Technology this advanced, this corrupted, goes against their cultural preference for simple, proven methods. If they loot the Helbrute at all, they typically strip it down to its most basic components, rejecting anything that seems too complicated or too tainted by chaos corruption. What emerges from this process is often barely recognizable as related to the original Helbrute. the pilot might find themselves reduced to powering a simple vehicle armed with nothing more sophisticated than a big shooter and some armor plates welded into place. All the advanced targeting systems, the sophisticated weapons, the complex integration of man and machine, all of it stripped away in favor of brutal simplicity. For a pilot who has spent centuries operating advanced weapon systems, this reduction to basics might feel like a final insult, a stripping away of the last pretense that they are anything more than a component in a primitive mechanism. Yet there is something to be said for simplicity. The pilot operating a snakebite-looted vehicle experiences far less sensory overload than those in more technologically aggressive clans. The lack of complex systems means fewer things to go wrong, fewer alarms sounding, fewer warnings of imminent failure. In a strange way, this primitive approach might actually reduce the pilot's overall suffering, not through any intention on the snakebite's part, but simply because there is less technology present to malfunction or be affected by chaos corruption. Beyond the clan-specific approaches to looting, we must consider the technical challenges that Ork mech boys face when attempting to integrate Helbrute technology into their own systems. The fundamental problem is one of compatibility. Helbrutes are built on a foundation of technology that originated with the Adeptus Astartes, which in turn derives from the Dark Age of technology and the accumulated knowledge of Mars. This technology operates according to well-understood principles of physics and engineering, even if the specific implementations are more advanced than what most Imperial citizens can comprehend. Chaos corruption adds another layer of complexity. The warp energies that permeate a Helbrute do not simply overlay the existing technology, but actually transform it at a fundamental level. Metal becomes more than metal, taking on properties that reflect the nature of the Chaos God who claims dominion over it. Energy patterns that should behave predictably instead respond to emotion and symbolism. Systems that should have clear cause and effect, relationships instead operate according to the twisted logic of the warp. Now, the Ork mech boys attempt to integrate this corrupted technology into their own systems, which operate according to entirely different principles. Ork technology functions through a combination of crude but effective engineering and the Gestalt psychic field that makes Orks believe their machines will work. When these three different technological paradigms, Imperial, Chaos, and Ork, come together in a single system, the results should be catastrophic. By all reasonable standards, the conflicting principles should cause the entire assembly to tear itself apart within moments of activation. But it doesn't. The machine works, after a fashion, because reality in Warhammer 40,000 is more flexible than strict materialism would suggest. The Ork Gestalt field, that collective unconscious belief in the functionality of their technology, proves strong enough to override the incompatibilities between different systems. It smooths over the contradictions, papers over the impossibilities, and makes things function through sheer conviction that they should function. The chaos corruption responds to this in complex ways. In some cases, the overwhelming confidence of the Ork field actually suppresses the malevolent aspects of the warp energies, forcing them into patterns that serve the Ork purpose rather than the intentions of the dark gods. In other cases, the corruption fights back, attempting to assert its own logic over the Ork belief system. The result is a kind of metaphysical tug-of-war, with the machine's functionality varying depending on which force is momentarily dominant. For the pilot trapped at the center of this conflict, the experience is unlike anything they have encountered before. Their consciousness exists at the intersection point of these competing realities, experiencing moments when Imperial engineering principles reassert themselves, followed by surges of chaos, corruption, interrupted by waves of Ork conviction that override everything else. This constant shifting of the underlying rules governing their existence can be disorienting in ways that pure chaos corruption never was. At least under chaos, there was a consistency to the madness, a predictable pattern to the torment. Under Ork control, nothing is reliable. Nothing remains constant, except the fundamental fact of continued existence. The technical aspects of Helbrute systems deserve detailed examination to understand what the Orks are actually working with when they loot these machines. At its core, a Helbrute contains a sarcophagus, an armored chamber designed to protect and sustain the pilot's broken body. This sarcophagus is connected to life support systems that maintain biological functions without allowing for healing or true rest. Nutrient feeds deliver sustenance directly to the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system that may no longer function properly. Waste removal systems handle the byproducts of metabolism in ways that are efficient but deeply undignified. The interface between the pilot's consciousness and the machine's systems is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Helbrute technology. Neural connections link the pilot's brain directly to the Helbrute's targeting computers, allowing for reaction times far faster than any human interface could achieve. Sensory feeds replace the pilot's natural senses with electronic inputs, providing information about the battlefield in formats that human perception was never designed to process. Motor control systems translate the pilot's intention to move into actual movement of the Helbrute's massive limbs, though the translation is imperfect, always carrying a sense of lag and distortion that reminds the pilot that this is not their true body. Chaos, corruption, affects all of these systems in specific ways. The life support systems, already borderline torturous in their efficiency, become actively malicious under chaos influence. They sustain life not to preserve the pilot, but to ensure the continuation of suffering. The neural interfaces, designed to provide clear information, become conduits for warp-tainted sensations that blur the line between reality and hallucination. The motor controls respond to emotion as much as intention, translating rage into more powerful strikes, but also making precise movements nearly impossible during moments of intense feeling. When Ork mech boys begin dismantling a Helbrute, they encounter all of these systems in various states of function and corruption. Their approach is profoundly practical. They identify what makes the machine move, what makes the weapons fire, what provides power to the whole assembly. Everything else is interesting, but ultimately secondary. The sophisticated life support system. If it's keeping the pilot alive, leave it alone. If it seems to be causing problems, bypass it with something simpler. The neural interface? If it still works, use it. If it's malfunctioning, replace it with more direct mechanical linkages that the pilot can learn to operate through trial and error. This pragmatic approach often results in the pilot's situation becoming simultaneously better and worse. Better, because many of the systems specifically designed to cause suffering are disabled or bypassed when the Orks rebuild the machine. Worse, because the systems that maintain some semblance of comfort or dignity are equally likely to be discarded in favor of more robust but less sophisticated alternatives. A pilot might find that their pain has decreased because the Orks accidentally disabled the nerve stimulators that Chaos had added for torture purposes. But they might also discover that their sensory input has become even more distorted because the Orks replaced half the sensor array with components from 3 different vehicle types, none of which were designed to work together. The power systems of a Helbrute present particular challenges for Ork integration. The original power core is typically based on Imperial plasma technology, refined over millennia to provide consistent output with minimal maintenance. Chaos, corruption, warps this consistency, making the power flow respond to emotional states and warp fluctuations. An Ork mech boy looking at such a power core sees only that it provides energy, and often attempts to extract more energy from it by simply demanding more output or connecting it to Ork power systems that are themselves barely controlled. This can lead to situations where the Helbrute's power core is simultaneously powering Imperial systems, chaos-corrupted mechanisms, and Ork technology, each drawing energy according to completely different principles. The resulting energy fluctuations should cause catastrophic failure, but the Ork gestalt field smooths over these incompatibilities, creating a stable enough system through sheer belief that everything is working properly. The pilot experiences this as wild variations in their available power, moments when all systems surge with excess energy followed by brownouts where nothing responds correctly, a constant oscillation that makes any attempt at consistency impossible. The weapons systems mounted on Helbrutes also undergo transformation when looted by Orks. Consider a plasma cannon, that devastating weapon that fires superheated matter capable of melting through the heaviest armor. In Imperial hands, this weapon is carefully calibrated, its output precisely controlled to maximize destructive effect while minimizing the risk of catastrophic overload. Under Chaos Corruption, the weapon becomes more dangerous to both target and user. Its output, enhanced by warp energies, but also more prone to unpredictable behavior. When Orks loot such a weapon, they see it as a really big gun that makes things explode, which is perfect. They make modifications to increase its rate of fire, add cooling systems that definitely won't work according to normal thermodynamics, but do work according to Ork belief, and paint it red to make the plasma bolts go faster. The result is a weapon that fires faster and hits harder than it should be capable of, but also has a chance of exploding in ways that defy all predictions. The pilot, still connected to these weapons through their neural interface, experiences each shot as a complex mixture of satisfaction, pain, and anxiety, never quite sure if this will be the shot that causes a catastrophic malfunction. The armor plating of a Helbrute is itself a marvel of engineering. Layers of ceramite and adamantium arranged in patterns that maximize protection while maintaining mobility. Chaos Corruption causes this armor to warp and twist, developing organic-looking growths and faces that scream silently from the metal. When Orks loot this armor, they often simply hammer out the worst of the corruption, welding additional plates over any gaps, and declaring the whole thing good enough. The result is protection that works through a combination of actual material strength and Ork conviction that armor should stop bullets. For the pilot, the armor represents their only protection against the outside world, and its modification by Orks can be deeply disturbing. They can feel through their connection to the machine when armor plates are removed or replaced, experiencing each modification as a kind of violation. The Orks, working with their characteristic enthusiasm and lack of precision, might accidentally expose vulnerable points while reinforcing others. The pilot becomes hyper-aware of these weak points, constantly anxious about attacks from angles that their armor no longer adequately protects. The mobility systems of a Helbrute, the joints and actuators that allow it to move its massive bulk, undergo perhaps the most dramatic changes under Ork modification. Imperial engineering created these systems to operate with precision and reliability, each movement calculated and controlled. Chaos Corruption made the movements jerky and unpredictable, responding to the pilot's emotional state as much as their conscious commands. Ork modifications add another layer of unpredictability, as mech boys replace sophisticated actuators with simpler but more robust mechanisms that may or may not respond exactly as intended. A pilot attempting to walk in a looted Helbrute chassis might issue the command to step forward, only to find the leg moving faster or slower than expected, the gait uneven because one leg has been replaced with components from a different vehicle class. Balance becomes a constant struggle, requiring conscious attention to maintain when it should be automatic. But in combat, this irregular gait can actually be advantageous, as enemies find it difficult to predict the looted machine's movements. The combination of Helbrute weapons platforms, chaos, corruption, and Ork modifications, creating something that behaves unlike any standard vehicle type. Beyond the technical challenges, we must consider the social dynamics that develop around looted Helbrutes within Ork society. The mech boy, who successfully captures and integrates a Helbrute, gains significant status within their clan. This is not just any loot. This is loot from space marines, corrupted by chaos, powerful and dangerous, even in its damaged state. Successfully repurposing such technology demonstrates skill and daring that other Orks respect and admire. The mech boy becomes known as someone who can work with the most challenging salvage, someone whose mechanical intuition can overcome even the most incompatible systems. This enhanced status leads to other benefits. More Orks want to work with this mech boy, bringing them their own looting projects or asking for modifications to their weapons and vehicles. The mech boy gains access to better resources, choice picks of salvage from future battles, and the ear of the war boss when tactical decisions are being made. In Ork society, where status is everything and status is earned through demonstrated capability, successfully looting a Helbrute represents a major achievement. The vehicle itself becomes something of a legend within the warband. Other Orks pointed out on the battlefield, telling stories about how it was captured and modified. The driver who operates the looted wagon gains status by association, becoming known as the Ork tough enough and skilled enough to control such a powerful machine. Young Orks aspire to someday drive similar vehicles, seeing the looted Helbrute as a symbol of what can be achieved through proper enthusiasm for violence and scrapping. The whole warband benefits from the psychological boost, the knowledge that they possess technology, looted from some of the galaxy's most fearsome warriors, enhancing their already formidable confidence. For the pilot trapped within, this social context creates yet another layer of alienation. They are the subject of stories told in a language they barely understand, celebrated for qualities that have nothing to do with who they once were or what they have become. The Orks do not celebrate the pilot's suffering or acknowledge their existence as a conscious being. They celebrate the machine, the weapon, the tool that serves their purposes so effectively. The pilot has become completely objectified, reduced to a function, rather than recognized as a person, even a damned person, experiencing existence. This objectification might actually represent a form of mercy, strange as that sounds. When Chaos worshippers torture their victims, they do so with full awareness of the victim's suffering. The pain is the point, and the torturers take pleasure in knowing that they are causing agony to a conscious being. But the Orks do not torture the pilot. They do not even recognize that torture is occurring. They simply use a tool, and any suffering that tool experiences is entirely incidental to their purpose. In a universe where so much evil is deliberate and malicious, there is something almost refreshing about evil that is completely unintentional. Suffering caused not through cruelty, but through simple indifference. The philosophical implications of Ork-Helbrute interactions extend into questions about identity and continuity of consciousness. When a being has been so thoroughly transformed, when every aspect of their existence has been altered beyond recognition, at what point do they stop being who they once were and become something entirely new? The space marine who entered the Helbrute sarcophagus was already different from the mortal they had been before their transformation into a superhuman warrior. The Chaos corruption added another layer of change, warping mind and body in ways that altered fundamental aspects of personality and perception. Now, under Ork ownership, yet another transformation occurs. Is the consciousness that experiences existence within a looted Ork war machine still the same entity that once swore oaths of loyalty to the Emperor or later pledged allegiance to the Chaos gods? Or has the succession of transformations created something new, a being that contains echoes of its previous incarnations, but cannot truly be said to be continuous with them? These are not merely academic questions. They touch on the fundamental nature of selfhood in a universe where transformation, corruption, and modification are constant threats to the integrity of personal identity. The pilot might struggle with these questions during moments of lucidity, trying to trace the thread of continuity that connects their present existence to their origin. They remember being a space marine, though those memories have the quality of stories told about someone else rather than personal experiences. They remember their fall to chaos, though the emotions that drove that fall now seem alien and incomprehensible. They experience their current existence as an Ork war machine component, but this existence is so different from anything that came before that it feels discontinuous with their history. Who are they, really? After all these transformations, does personal identity survive such fundamental changes, or does it shatter and reform multiple times, creating a succession of related but distinct beings who share memories, but not true continuity? These existential questions find no answers in the grim darkness of the far future. The pilot continues to exist, continues to suffer, or not quite suffer, continues to function as whatever their current circumstances demand. They are simultaneously too much and too little, containing multitudes of past selves, while being unable to fully embody any single identity. This fractured existence might be the truest expression of what it means to be caught in the machinery of Warhammer 40,000's endless war, to be transformed and transformed again until the original self becomes nothing more than a distant echo, barely audible beneath the thunder of present circumstances. What can be said with certainty is that the Orks, through their simple act of looting, accomplish something that all the warriors and sorcerers of chaos cannot prevent. They rob suffering of its significance. They take the carefully cultivated agony that the dark gods have invested so much effort into creating, and they use it to power vehicles that will crash into enemy lines with all the subtlety of a meteorite strike. They transform monuments to despair into tools for their own aggressive joy. And in doing so, they demonstrate that even in the grim darkness of the far future, meaning is not fixed but fluid, dependent on context and interpretation. As we approach the conclusion of this examination, we must consider what lessons, if any, can be drawn from the phenomenon of orcs looting Helbrutes. For the forces of the Imperium, these encounters provide valuable intelligence about both their enemies. Studying the remains of looted wagons that incorporated chaos technology can reveal weaknesses in that technology that might be exploited in future engagements. Observing how orcs modify and repurpose advanced systems can inspire new approaches to battlefield salvage and rapid repair. And understanding the psychological dynamics between pilots and their orc captors might offer insights into the nature of chaos, corruption, and the possibility of mitigating its effects. For the forces of chaos, these encounters represent a frustrating reminder that their power, vast though it may be, is not absolute. The orcs' immunity to corruption and their ability to desecrate carefully crafted torments through simple pragmatism poses a challenge that cannot be overcome through conventional means. Some chaos theorists have suggested developing Helbrutes specifically designed to be unloothable, incorporating self-destruct mechanisms or corruption so virulent that even orcs would be affected. But such developments remain theoretical, and even if implemented, would likely only delay rather than prevent orc looting. For the orcs themselves, the looting of Helbrutes is simply business as usual, another type of enemy vehicle to claim and repurpose. They do not philosophize about the implications of their actions, or reflect on what it means to transform instruments of torture into weapons of war. They simply see something valuable, take it, and use it to fight more effectively. This unreflective pragmatism is perhaps their greatest strength, allowing them to navigate a galaxy of horror and complexity without being burdened by the weight of meaning that crushes other factions. And for the pilots trapped within the Helbrutes, these encounters represent change in an existence that had seemed eternally static. Whether that change constitutes improvement is a question that can only be answered by the individuals experiencing it, and they no longer have voices that can be heard or understood by outsiders. They remain trapped, suffering, damned, but the context of that damnation has shifted in ways that might be significant or might be merely a different flavor of the same eternal torment. In the final analysis, the interaction between orcs and Helbrutes serves as a microcosm of the larger conflicts that define Warhammer 40,000. It is a collision between different philosophies of existence, different approaches to technology and warfare, different understandings of what it means to suffer and endure and continue fighting despite everything. The outcome of any individual encounter might seem small, a single looted war machine in a galaxy filled with billions of conflicts, but the implications ripple outward, touching on questions about the nature of consciousness, the meaning of suffering, and the possibility of change in a universe that seems designed to resist it. The Helbrute screams in its mechanical prison, trapped in torment that was meant to last forever. The orc mechboy strips away that prison's outer layers, not to grant freedom but to build something new from its components. The pilot within experiences both continuation and transformation, still suffering, but suffering now with purpose, still damned, but no longer alone, in an isolation defined purely by pain. It is not redemption. It is not salvation. It is simply change. And in the grim darkness of the far future, even change of the most ambiguous kind represents something notable. When orcs find a Helbrute in Warhammer 40,000, they do not see horror or pity or divine punishment. They see loot. And in that simple observation, in that reduction of cosmic suffering to mere salvage value, they accomplish something that all the prayers and weapons of more sophisticated factions cannot match. They rob suffering of its power by refusing to acknowledge its significance. The Helbrute remains a prison, but the orcs have repurposed that prison, and the pilot within must continue existing in this new context, neither free nor unchanged, but undeniably different from what they were before. This is the fundamental nature of the orc-Helbrute interaction, a meeting of absolute suffering and absolute pragmatism that produces results both horrifying and strangely hopeful. It reminds us that in a universe of endless war and darkness, meaning is constructed rather than inherent, and what seems eternal and unchangeable can be transformed by those who refuse to accept the rules others have established. The Orks fight on, looting what they can and destroying what they cannot. Their simple joy in combat, undiminished by all the horror they encounter. The Helbrutes continue their tormented existence, some trapped forever in the prisons designed by chaos, others repurposed by Ork ingenuity into weapons that serve different masters. And somewhere, in the vast and terrible expanse of the galaxy, other encounters are occurring. Other Orks are discovering other Helbrutes, and the cycle continues. Each meeting produces its own unique outcome, its own particular combination of suffering and utility, damnation and purpose. Some pilots find in their Ork captors a strange kind of relief, a purpose that makes their continued existence marginally more bearable. Others experience only new forms of torment, their chaos-designed suffering compounded by the indignity of serving Xenos. But all of them, every single pilot trapped in every looted Helbrute, discovers one fundamental truth, that in the grim darkness of the far future, fate is not as fixed as the dark gods would have their victims believe. Change is possible, transformation occurs, and even the most carefully constructed prison can be repurposed by those who see only function and potential, rather than symbol and meaning. Thank you for watching this exploration of one of Warhammer 40,000's most fascinating intersections, where the calculated cruelty of chaos meets the unknowing pragmatism of the Orks. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Stories of Hammer for more content exploring the grim darkness of the far future. There are countless other stories waiting to be told, countless other corners of this vast and terrible universe to examine and understand. Until next time, remember that in the 41st millennium, even in darkness, there are shades of grey, and even in torment, there are degrees of suffering. The galaxy is vast, the stories are endless, and there is always more to discover about the factions, characters, and conflicts that make Warhammer 40,000 one of the richest fictional universes ever created.
I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys are sleepy. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to comment, give me feedback. And yeah, love you guys.